What's up everybody? So in this video we're going to be looking at this absolutely beautiful McLaren because the topic of this video is membrane transport, right? Just like this car transport stuff, we're going to be looking at membrane transport. So in the previous video I described the membrane structure. So we know we are made up of billions of cells, right? The smallest living unit. And we learned a key structure, the membrane. The membrane is this little wall that surrounds a cell. It surrounds the cell. Now, the membrane is not only around the cell, but it can also exist around the organelles. It's just a little wall. That's all it is. Now, in that video, we described some of the key structures, right? Such as this phospholipid bilayer, this cholesterol, these proteins, they can be integral or peripheral proteins, this glycoprotein, right? And we described what they were vaguely doing. Now, for membrane transport, we're going to care a lot about these proteins, and the phospholipid bilayer. So we need to know that there's many different ways of transport. So it's just like in real life. You can get transported by a car, a train, a bus, a ship, walking, bicycle, scooter, whatever, right? There's so many different ways. Now that's the same thing in your cell. There's so many ways to get something from the outside to the inside or from the inside to the outside. The main role of the membrane is to control what goes in and what goes out. So what are the ways by which things can be moved into and out of the cell? There are many ways. Simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, osmosis, endocytosis, exocytosis, active transport. So it's these 5 key ways. In this video, we're only gonna be focusing on simple diffusion. Notice, simple diffusion is a method of membrane transport that does not require a protein. It requires just the membrane, and you'll see exactly what I mean by this. So facilitated osmosis needs this kind of protein called a channel protein, whereas active transports needs a carrier protein. And then there's a completely different method called endocytosis and exocytosis, which uses neither of these. You'll see when I make a video on it. So ultimately there's these 5 ways, and we're only going to focus on this one. That's why I put this smiley face here. But don't worry, there'll be a video on each of these. So I guess why I'm starting with simple diffusion is because it's one of the simplest ones. So it's always best to start with what makes the most sense, and then the other ones can be built on that. So notice what we did here. I basically zoomed in to this membrane here. So we have the outside on the top, the outside of the cell here, and then we have the inside of the cell here, right? So here I have the membrane, we're zooming into it. We're basically zooming into like right here. Extra, we're zooming extra. We zoomed like this, now we're zooming extra to explain simple diffusion. Because like I said, it doesn't need these proteins, so we're only gonna care about this part. So now we're zoomed in, we can see here the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell, and we can see this phospholipid bilayer, some cholesterol, but no proteins. Now I believe the best way to describe simple diffusion is by using a quick analogy, a quick real-life situation. Because you can always just think of this one, it will make sense to you. So picture this. We have a nice, struggling to scroll down here. We have a nice house, a nice tree here, a nice tree. Then we have a door, and then we have the inside of a house. We got a tree, door, inside of the house. Now, your parents will know this. You probably don't know it yet. But if it's a really hot day outside, so the more sun you have, or the more suns I represent here, it means the hotter it is. We can see it's really warm outside and just nice inside. It's not that hot, just one sun. It's a little bit nice. Now, so it's a summer day. It's really warm outside. Now you're gonna be funny and you're gonna go outside and just while you're thinking about your girlfriend or boyfriend, you forget open the door. So you open the door, you leave, and you left open. This is gonna annoy the hell out of your parents. Why? Because what's gonna happen? What do you think is gonna happen right now? Right now, the really warm heat will go into the house, right? The house will get warm, so the sun will go in. It will diffuse. It will diffuse. Diffuse means to spread out. So the heat is gonna spread from diffuse means to spread. So the heat is going to spread from the outside where it's very warm to inside where it's very cold until we get to a point where the inside of the house is equally warm to the outside. So this will annoy your parents, right? Because they're paying so much for this aircon to keep this room cold, and as soon as you open this door, it's just going to get as warm as the outside. All the money just wasted. So what I just explained here is simple diffusion. Simple diffusion. We needed no energy, we needed nothing. It just happened naturally. That's what simple diffusion is. When something, a molecule, in this case I'm using heat, when a molecule moves from an area of high concentration, so high heat, to an area of low heat naturally. No energy was required. It just happens naturally. It's impossible. This would never happen. If you open this door and it was in this scenario right here, it would the heat wouldn't leave. Your room wouldn't get colder, right? That's impossible. That's impossible. So it's gonna work the other way, and we call that simple diffusion. So let's go back to this real cell now, cell membrane here. Again, the outside and the inside. You can see I made the inside blue to remind you that we're on the inside of the cell because it's light blue there. Now anyways, let's relate what I just said now to a real cell. So here's a mess here that I'm going to clean up, and it's going to look real good afterwards, so don't worry. So we're going to start off with a molecule. This molecule is going to be called oxygen, because we all know oxygen. You inhale oxygen, right, and exhale carbon dioxide. So here we have another molecule, carbon dioxide. Now, we inhale oxygen because we know, maybe you don't know this yet, but you're going to learn it later. We need oxygen. Why? What is the point of even breathing oxygen? Because oxygen is going to take place in a process called cellular respiration. This is a process that happens. You don't have to worry about this for now. Just let's hear me out. This is a process that happens inside your cell that uses oxygen and a bunch of other things that you don't have to care about now to make energy. And as a byproduct, you're going to release carbon dioxide. Like a waste product will be carbon dioxide. So let's say you inhale a whole bunch of this oxygens, a whole bunch of them. So I made a lot of duplication here. We have a whole bunch of oxygen. We just inhaled it. So it's not inside our cell yet, but we want to get it there because our cells need it. So what's going to happen now is, because you have so much oxygen right outside of your cell and not much on the inside. Why do you not have much on the inside? Because as soon as this oxygen is in here, it gets used by cell respiration to make energy, and then as a byproduct or a waste product, carbon dioxide is made. So essentially, oxygen is used, carbon dioxide is made. So at all times, the inside of the cell will always have a very little bit of oxygen, not much, because it's always being used. So this is the scenario. You'll have a lot of oxygen right outside and a little bit inside. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen? This oxygen is going to diffuse by simple diffusion through the membrane into where? Into the cell. Let's put it here. Into the cell. So what was required for this to happen? We needed a concentration gradient. What is that? A concentration gradient is basically when there is a high concentration of something on one side and a low on the other. That's a gradient. A gradient. You can kind of think of a gradient as like the ski slope. When you go skiing, there's a gradient. It's high on one side and low on the other side, right? That's why you can ski all the way down. There's a slope. There's a gradient. The same way here. There's a high amount of oxygen on one side, or a high amount of a certain molecule on one side, and a low amount on the other side. So, therefore, just like you can ski down that slope from the high side to the low side, this molecule will go from where there's a lot and move down through the membrane to where there's a little, right? So that's simple diffusion until it reaches an equilibrium. But we know as soon as this oxygen moves down, it gets used. So as soon as it gets used, again, there's low concentration. So now more will come down and so on, right? So that's what you need to know. That is an example of simple diffusion. Now we know that as this oxygen comes in, it gets used to make what? To make carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is going to be building up. It's going to be building up because it's consistently being made as a byproduct of cell respiration. And we got to get it out of our body. It's a waste product. So at the end of the day, we have a whole bunch, a high concentration of carbon dioxide building up, and then there will be a low amount on the outside. Why? Because as soon as we get these carbon dioxides outside of our cell, we exhale them, so we get rid of them. So as soon as they get here, they'll be released. So there's always a low concentration of carbon dioxide on the outside and a high on the inside. So this allows what? This allows diffusion. Again, simple diffusion. The oxygen was just an example of simple diffusion helping a molecule get into the cell. Now this carbon dioxide is an example of how simple diffusion can bring a molecule out of the cell, right? There's a high concentration here, low concentration here. So we have a very good concentration gradient. And now this carbon dioxide can freely float through the membrane down its concentration gradient. And that's how we can get rid of it. So we're almost done here, almost done. Let me move this stuff for clarity a little bit. So now I guess the last question that you may have is, what allows, why do we not need a protein channel, right? We have here these protein channels which are used to move molecules from one side to another. So why do we not require a protein channel for this? Two reasons. One, because all molecules that do simple diffusion have to be very small, such as oxygen. Oxygen is made up of 2 oxygen elements. That's super, super tiny. Carbon dioxide is made up of a carbon and 2 oxygens. That's also super, super tiny. So only big molecules like proteins, amino acids, glucose, they're made up of many carbons and many oxygens and many hydrogens and things like that. So they're much bigger. So they are not allowed. It won't work for them. They can't use simple diffusion. They have to use another method, one of these, which we'll talk about later. So it's important that you know only small molecules, very small ones that can actually fit in between these phospholipids, they can do simple diffusion. And good examples are typically gases like nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, any of these kind of things, gases, or very, very small amino acids or things like that. So just the point is very small molecules. So that's the one thing we require. Another thing we require is these molecules need to be hydrophobic. Remember, hydro means water. Phobic means to be afraid of. So these these molecules that want to transfer across need to be a bit afraid of water. Why? Because we know this area right here is hydrophobic. There is no water here. The water is only on the outside or the inside of the cell, right? Because these right here, there's no water. So the only way a molecule can transport across the membrane is if they are comfortable passing through an area where there's no water. So only hydrophobic molecules can do that. Molecules that love water are unable to pass through here because as soon as they get to this part where there's no water, they bounce back. Okay, so these are the two main requirements. They need to be small and they need to be hydrophobic. Another word for hydrophobic is nonpolar. So oxygen and carbon dioxide, they are hydrophobic. So they are nonpolar. They have no charges, no plus and minuses. They're just neutrals. They can very easily pass through this area that has no water. So those are the main molecules that can do simple diffusion. Big molecules and polar molecules cannot. They will need to use some of these other ways, which we'll talk about in the future. So, conclusion, simple diffusion needs concentration gradient. It does not require any energy. No energy is required. This process happens by itself, so we don't need to use any ATP. No ATP is needed. Remember from the analogy from the heat. We didn't need any energy for this to happen. It happened by itself. The same way, these oxygen and carbon dioxide molecules move by themselves. No energy is required. So no energy, yes concentration gradient, small molecules, hydrophobic molecules, and no protein channel needed. And that's it for this video on simple diffusion.